Alphabet, IBM, Intel, and Tesla all reporting second quarter earnings in the coming days. With us now in studio from Washington, Nathan Hager, co-host of Bloomberg Daybreak, and Bailey Lipshultz with us as well, Bloomberg senior equities reporter. Nathan, great to see you
nice
in
to
person.
Be seen.
Nice to be seen. I love that.
For our radio audience, this is what I look like.
The grand reveal did not disappoint.
Yes.
It did not disappoint.
Nathan, just set the table for us here. There has been a lot of kind of anxiety and agita just about the AI spend. What are we going to learn this week in broad terms from these companies?
Well, I think one of the first things we're going to learn in terms of the CapEx is, I mean, obviously we've seen so much projection into how much of these companies, these four major hyperscalers, are going to be spending over the next year, projecting something like, what, $725 billion. So when we hear from Google parent Alphabet on Wednesday, I think that for a lot of analysts is going to be the big focus on how they set the table for when we hear from Meta, Microsoft, Amazon a week from now.
It's a busy season. It's going to be a busy earnings season.
You guys can't leave, okay? You're just going to stay here through the earnings season. We're going to lock you down. We had this Chinese startup, this AI startup, Moonshot. This started kind of all of this, but they are maybe eyeing a Hong Kong IPO after this big AI breakthrough.
It's crazy how fast life changes.
We just did this. How does that work? How big do we think it would be, and how realistic do you think that is?
They're closing a funding round right now at $30 billion,
sure.
Smaller relative to $1.75 trillion, which is what SpaceX went public at. I think we've been expecting DeepSeek, the other well-known Chinese AI company, is targeting an IPO in mainland China early next year. So it does seem like the kind of table has been set for these two companies to raise money, but kind of keeping in mind 30 billion private round, 70 billion private round, even if they raised large IPOs, and those would be big IPOs in a normal year, when you compare that to SpaceX's $86 billion IPO and you compare that to what we're expecting from Anthropic and OpenAI, it's kind of small potatoes. And again, it's also a very different market. It's the opposite, as Nathan was mentioning, it's an opposite market where you say, okay, Meta is Facebook, Meta, Google, Alphabet.
I do that all the time.
Like, when you're expecting these big companies with big checks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bailey, somebody said something to me last week that stuck with me, and that is, with China, you've got a closed state that has a very open approach to AI, and here it's the opposite. You've got an open society, and yet these kind of closed-off companies that are doing all the pioneering work on AI. How does that manifest itself just in the way you see AI's development going forward here? And when you look at a company like Moonshot versus Anthropic or an OpenAI?
The argument, David, when you look even at the cost of tokens or the cost of performing kind of menial tasks, it's so cheap, and it becomes kind of this overarching debate between the U.S. and China is there a race to the bottom? And kind of the pitch going back to that DeepSeek moment, a year and a half, 2 years ago, that was kind of an, oh, wow, they're able to execute just as well, if not better, on a lot of tasks for a small fraction of the price. There's still a lot of uncertainty around what chips are actually performing these products, so you have to keep that in mind. But when you think about this potential future of AI, the debate here in New York, the debate probably in D.C. and around the world is, do you want companies like Bloomberg or others using Chinese models, or would you rather use an Anthropic or an OpenAI product? And I think that's a big debate. Is cheaper better if you're utilizing it for important tasks?
But Nathan, this goes to the other issue, which is, can you really monetize these products? And if you're competing with an open source format, this is like the big thing that people are whispering. What is the answer to that? I know we don't know, but also, why aren't you seeing that hesitancy or even that questioning really reflected in the enthusiasm for these massive IPOs?
And it certainly gets into the question of, why these hyperscalers are spending so much money, projecting so much. We saw just in the first quarter after Google reported then, I'm calling it Google, it's Alphabet. Alphabet projected something like 190 on the top side, $1 billion that they're going to spend in CapEx, a huge chunk of that $725 billion number. If on Wednesday we hear from Google that they're going to project it even higher, what does that mean in terms of, to your point, whether they should be going for something like a cheaper model? And then to the question about whether the government is involved in this, how much of the parameters can be sort of
it's also interesting to me because when you look at think about your iPhone, right? When you look at the development of these smartphones, at first, you had a bunch of different competitors, and it was Apple that made it open source and made other developers able to access the code so that they could put apps, so they could put it on the phone. And that's the one that took off. And you would think that had been a proven business model. But go ahead, Bailey.
No, that just becomes the underlying debate, though, that we're seeing in this market right now is, are you better off overspending, something Google and Meta have been vocal about? We'd rather overspend than underspend and lose. And to that point, the big question 5 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now, is this similar to Cisco building the internet? Is this going to lay the groundwork for companies to come in and make a lot of money? Because yes, you do have companies that were around in the dot-com bubble that fueled kind of this technological shift. But what does an OpenAI or an Anthropic look like, and what companies are we not even discussing now that are going to come out of these?
Well, it gets to the question, when I lost my train of thought, what I was thinking about whether China is potentially taking some of the technology that some of these American companies are building, whether the federal government wants to try to stop that as well, getting into the difficulties of regulating these Chinese models and having them potentially be stolen by from American companies.
Yes. Bailey, you've been living through the undulations in the chip sector last week, and we saw that sell-off by the end of the week. What's the messaging from them, from these chip companies in specific? It seems like there's kind of a relentless optimism to them.
It's fine. Everything's fine. It's a little meme with the guy. Everything's fine. Everything's fine.
And how are investors processing that? I mean, they say that there is demand. They're making strides to fulfill that demand, and yet
it pays to be optimistic. The big question comes back to, when does this chip bottleneck no longer exist? And David, I think the bigger thing to keep in mind when we look backwards to look forward, Taiwan Semi crushed their earnings report. They gave terrific guidance, and the stock was down tremendously, on top of falling 12% before the print. So this is an environment, as we would talk about on our desk, calling it price to perfection, where the bar is very high, and you're looking at a semiconductor index that's up over 100% still in the last 12 months after a 20% pullback. So Nathan and I were talking about this on Friday, and it's kind of a question of, okay, well, what does a good print look like that actually drives stocks?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, Intel is up it's over 150% year to date, and if Intel is potentially getting some of the spend that IBM in their preliminary results was saying that we didn't catch, that some of this shifting spending was going to be going to chips and AI data servers, whether Intel can grab some of that. If it doesn't reach that high bar that's already priced into the stock at 157% plus, is there going to be potentially some profit taking?
I also wonder, as you look at these huge capex expenditures, when it comes to competing with China, that is a place that can do things very differently, especially when it comes to investment and with energy. How big is the price of energy going to start factoring into where people think they're going to pick winners and losers here?
I think it's already playing out. And we're looking at a market that's trying to, and has been spending the last few months thinking about, what does, again, 2030 look like if we're already betting on the companies making these chips. Is it nuclear? Is it geothermal? How can we address the energy bottleneck? Because right now we're dealing with semiconductors being a bottleneck. Well, the next step will be, how do we actually address powering these?
And China has really diversified its energy in a top-down way that we haven't really done here in the U.S. Yeah.
Bailey, I want to ask you about SpaceX, if I could pull an audible here. We have seen that stock really come down precipitously since the debut. I've been thinking of Newton's third law. I mean, what goes up must come down, I guess, and we're kind of seeing that in real terms here in the stock price. What explains that? A dose of realism on investors' part, that what they were sold at the beginning might not be coming to pass, or it's unlikely that it would be guaranteed to come to pass? What do you make of the sharp downturn that we've seen? I guess $1 trillion wiped off the market cap there in recent days.
No, if you look at the chart, it looks a lot like Cerebras, which went public a few weeks, month and a half before. And there's a lot of excitement around the IPO. People are on social media talking about it. Everyone
a lot
at
of FOMO.
a dinner party.
You don't want to miss out on it. Yeah.
When I was at my grandma-in-law's birthday party, everyone was like, should I buy the IPO? And I'm like,
wait, really?
I don't give investment advice.
Give advice.
No, 100%.
Bailey Lipshultz does not give investment advice.
I do not give investment advice, but there was so much excitement. And then you kind of step back and say, we're in a market right now that we've seen a pullback. So if you're an investor and you're selling Micron or you're selling Intel, well, SpaceX gets a lot more difficult to justify a $1.75, $2 trillion valuation. So naturally, you'll take some chips off the table. We haven't seen a true fundamental change to the underlying thesis. Starship delay was small on the margin. You should see a typical pullback, but that's not really, shouldn't equate to a 35% pullback. The big question now is this a company that is going to deliver news flow between now and their first earnings report, sometime likely next month, and then an unlock of hundreds of billions of dollars of shares. No one knows what that looks like. So you have short sellers betting that the company will either, at least the stock price will continue to go down, and then you have just the uncertainty around the next Starship launch and uncertainty around what the earnings looks like on top of an unlock. There's a lot going on there.
Nathan, we've got about 30 seconds before we let you go. Intel, IBM earnings this week. What do we expect?
So IBM, as I said, mentioned that they were surprised or caught off guard by the shift over to chip and AI spending. The question for Intel is, do they draw in some of that spending as well and potentially overperform later on this week?
And IBM really punished for that. Over the last
down
week.
20. Not since the Nixon administration.
Wow.
We've seen a drop.
There you
1968.
There's a lot of Nixoning in the
rare.
news
It's
recently.
rare for us to be able to say that. Not since the
third
Nixon
Nixon-related headline I've
Did I
heard
miss
this.
Nixon maxing?
Nixon maxing, that's what I was referencing. Yeah. We will not be Nixon maxing here on set, but I do appreciate you both coming in on a Sunday.